Good morning. My name is Stretch Hoff, and I'm an interviewer for the Cincinnati Public Library. And today is the 14th of August. And Dennis Daly is doing our camera work for us this morning. And this morning we have Walter Kern, who has a very interesting story to tell us. Actually covered 2 wars here, so we get 2 for the price of 1, Walter. And so good morning to you.
Good morning.
What we'd like to do is just start with your life story and where you were born and how the schooling system, I know you and I have talked about, but then how you eventually got to your military career. So if you want to just start, I'd be delighted.
Well, first of all, thank you for asking me to participate in the program, which I believe is very important. And today is an important day because today, in 1945, Japanese surrendered unconditionally. Mm-hmm. There it was already the 15th, but here the 14th. So we
You're
started.
Really up on your history.
Well, part of it I lived, mm-hmm. The other I read about. Mm-hmm. Well, to start out with, I was born in Germany almost 79 years ago in the Rhineland and grew up with a normal family. My father, who was an orphan, really pushed hard, and he was a businessman, no nonsense. And my mother counterbalanced that by being more generous. And both types worked very well together for us. I had a brother 5 years younger than I am, and so we grew up in a rather middle-class situation. Mm-hmm. My father was a World War I veteran, 4.5 years in the service, 3 times wounded, taken prisoner by the French, escaped again. So as you can imagine, he was a hard act to follow. So I tried and never really fully satisfied him. There was always something in him that he just could do better. And I said, I did this and this and that. And he would say, don't judge yourself on what you have accomplished. Judge yourself what you could have accomplished with the intellect that you have.
That's a tough act.
This is a tough act to follow. Yeah. And not until he died when he was 80 years old, 8 months before, I had a feeling I got to go visit him, and so 4 months before he passed away, I visited him and took him to a plant where I was inspecting. And I asked the plant engineer...
Is this when you were with Procter at the time?
I was at Procter & Gamble then, yeah. It was 1976. And I asked the plant engineer, and I said, would you mind putting somebody aside to show my father the factory? Oh, he says, Mr. Kern, that'll be an honor. I do this myself. And so my father went with him all day. And on his way home in the car, I could see sitting next to me, he was hee-hawing something around. And finally it came out, he says, the engineer is very impressed with you. You're in charge of all the plants worldwide, 254 plants, and you write all this. You amounted to something after all.
There you go. All his hard work paid off.
3 months later, he passed away.
Oh, that's wonderful. It ended that way.
And this was very good.
Yeah. Now, where were you born in Germany? You say the Rhine.
I was born on the Rhine River, a small town called Königswinter, which literally translated King's Winter. But the winter is a butchery of the word vineyard. And it has a hill there, about 1,000 feet tall, with a castle on it right overlooking the Rhine River. And this height is rather strategic and the Romans used it as a signal tower. And they would signal to Cologne, and from Cologne up to Koblenz and Trier, which is the oldest city. And so on that slope is where my grandmother and her grandfather had a winery. And that is still in the family possession.
You're showing a picture of that.
Yes.
Now, is that near Stuttgart? Or
No, that is near Cologne. In fact,
Cologne.
it's 20 miles south of Cologne, maybe 6 miles south of Bonn, but on the right bank, and the right bank are the east bank of the Rhine River.
And that's where you did your schooling and so forth?
Yes, what I did, we of course have the basic schooling, the 8 years, and during the 4th grade, you undertake a test to see whether you're academically qualified to go to high school. And 90% fail. Only 10% when I was there went to high school. There were 5, we were with 54 in the class, 5 could go to high school. And then the town didn't have a high school, so the next town I had to take the streetcar and go there.
Did the people who didn't go to high school learn a vocation then or something?
Yes, they would finish the 8th grade, and after that would enter a vocational school of their choice, matching the profession they had chosen. And if they were butcher, they would learn about that. If they were bakers, they learned about that. If they were accountant or what, they were specifically for that.
Okay.
And they would graduate with an apprenticeship completion, a journeyman, and then could make a master at age 25, and which allowed them to teach, but you could not have a master with 22. You had no experience.
Okay,
So
yeah.
they bucked in the experience first.
Okay, so take us from there to your entering
Well,
military career.
as you know, the war started in 1939. My father was drafted immediately. In fact, before the war started September 1, 39, and Sunday, August 27 was mobilization day. And he was a World War I veteran, so they had a reserve unit where they trained already in 37 and 38. And they were all then transferred to the Western Front facing the French, while the main German army bulk was in the east attacking Poland. And luckily the French didn't attack, so he was discharged in 1941 with high blood pressure. And those of you who know high blood pressure, he had 250 over 180. The physician wrote in there, and my father steamed the envelope open because he wanted to see what they're going to say. It said their patient not expected to live 6 months. And my father's simple answer was, what do they know? I show them that a high pressure system also works, and lived to be 80.
Yeah, so he was right.
So.
Now, how old are you when the war started?
10.
10. Okay. Is this when you started with the Hitler Youth then? or
No,
when-
oh yes, I started with the Hitler Youth. In
Tell us
fact, I
about
was
that.
very eager to get in. What we have is the Hitler Youth had 2 branches, one of them from 10 to 14 and the other one from 14 to 18. The one that was from 10 to 14 was called the Jungvolk, or the young folks. And you would graduate from flight to flight, you always go 1 grade up, and then after that you would go in the Hitler Youth. Now the Hitler Youth had then various branches for the Navy, branches for the Army, branches for communication, branches for the Air Force, and I joined then the Air Force. I always wanted to be a flyer.
Now, did you have to take some sort of a test to determine where you would go? And
Oh yes.
Yeah, okay.
So you had to go to the doctor, night flying, everything, and I learned to fly a glider. And the glider was a funny thing, a very open one, 6 guys in the rear would hold it as hard as they could, and another 6 guys in the front would pull on a rubber band about that thick.
Like a slingshot?
Yes.
Really?
And you would give the command, and basically the first one, run out. This is ausziehen, and then they need to run, laufen, and then you told the guys in the rear, los, and they, and in order to get the first wing, which was called the A, you had to stay 30 seconds in the air. And I'm telling you, this is like a long time.
Forever. So you weren't on any kind of a mountain ridge, you were on a flat?
Oh, no, it was a mountain, a hill, and we would then have to drag the thing up again, down. But to us it was fun, because when it was on Wednesday, the teachers couldn't give any homework for that, and we met on Saturdays. And Saturdays in our afternoon, because we all went to school Saturday. And if you go to school Saturdays, that's 20% more.
Now, was the Hitler Youth something that you were told to do?
Oh, yes. But everybody wanted to
They all
belong.
sign up.
Yes, what you do is you sign up. You're gonna be someplace. You have a uniform. And girls like uniforms, soldiers. You're not a civvy. Then you wanted a little chevron or something that identifies that you had climbed the career ladder. You didn't want to be bare soldier, nothing. So this was all done to encourage, and I got to say, I went there with enthusiasm.
Yeah.
You wouldn't believe it. My father declared me for crazy, but I said, he's an old man, he doesn't know.
And didn't you tell me that at some point you got a little knife, did you say?
Oh, yes. In fact, I was so dedicated that in order to get a full-fledged membership, and you get your patch on the left shoulder, you get a sign here, you get to wear this knife, and you had to undergo tests, including 2 nights out in the field all by yourself with nothing.
Survival, huh?
And I made sure that I got this certificate on Hitler's birthday, April 20th, 1939, when he turned 50. And my father still kept the book. He said, see how crazy you were?
Okay, so then you were 10 years old when the war started, and that's where you became in the Hitler Youth program.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, then. Okay.
And everybody in my class, or everybody, I don't know anybody who wasn't there. And I became then a squad leader, and I looked over the boys, and I remember you were responsible. So this one boy had run down heels. So I said, you better have your shoes fixed. He said, well, my mother. I go to the house, ring the doorbell, and say, I'm so-and-so. You, the mother, get his shoes fixed.
Now, did you wear your uniform to school every day?
No.
Only when you were
only when you went there.
Okay.
The school was still old-fashioned. We had caps like you see in student print.
Beanies.
Right, but they had a shield, not just the straight one.
Yeah.
And you had the school colors. Ours was green. We were called the tree frogs by the others. And you had stripes around which indicate what class you were. And you wore this cap, and you go by the neighbor, and you would say, oh, Walter, you're already in that class. They would know. So that's what you wore to school, and you wore good clothes to school. We didn't have a cafeteria, my God, no study hall. You had to be there at 8 o'clock in the morning. It's your job to get to school, not a school bus. Who the heck are we? You need school books, your parents buy them, You want to have some lunch, at 10 o'clock you have a 15-minute break and you eat your sandwich. And you may look at the neighbor and say, you got a better one, I'll trade you.
Yeah, okay.
But this was all, and during the first 4 years of grade school, the principal was also the school teacher of the 8th grade. And we had boys on this side, girls on that side, and starting in the 4th grade, girls in a separate part of a building, which we had a huge firewall in between. You didn't even see them. And just kept your trap shut. We didn't have a secretary, no nurse, no typewriter, not even a phone.
Yeah.
And we had 500 kids in the school, and I tell you, it works. I didn't get a bad education.
Well, okay, so when the war started then in 1939,
Yeah,
and you were 10,
yeah.
okay, now what happened then with your career then? From
Okay.
Hitler Youth up into when you were in the
Yeah, I
war?
went into the Hitler Youth then, and since I was in the Air Force, there we were very close to the people on the anti-aircraft in Cologne. So we used to make visits, and starting in '42, Cologne got extremely heavy bombs. In fact, on May 31st, 1942, the British attacked for the first time with 1,000 aircraft. And there were huge losses because primarily the British had these firebombs which were based on phosphor. There were 6-pounders that would break easily open, and phosphor has the characteristic that as soon as it is exposed to oxygen, it burns. And you cannot extinguish it with water, so we had to extinguish it with sand. Now, after 8 days, you move the sand away, the fire immediately starts again. And so a lot of houses got burned, and so I learned there on the anti-aircraft, and then I volunteered to go there in high school, and they transferred the high school to barracks right around Cologne, and we were in there and manned the guns when the attacks came, and otherwise out again, you learn to school.
As you were about
For
14?
just 13, 14, yeah.
So you
Yeah.
were involved in the war at that
Oh
age?
yeah, and at that time the Americans didn't attack. They didn't attack until 1943. And they were daylight. The British always at night. And the Americans thought with B-17, a flying fortress, that they could come, and their initial targets were all military, while the British were all civilians. You know, it was demoralizing, taking a city out. The Americans entered that later on too because they ran out of targets. So that's how you got involved in it, and on weekends you could go home and you would rotate that. And then during the first part of the war, you know, you could see all the advances. I remember I had a map there and it was all picking it. And then slowly but surely it was going back. And you could see the writing at the wall. And I remember talking with my father, and I was still, we're gonna have that. No, we're gonna do that. So he pinned me down by saying, you think we're smarter than they are? Of course, Dad. And you do agree that there are more of them? Yes, yes. And he says, you think we're as smart as a mouse, you know, gets overall in? Yeah. And you say, they are big, fat, dumb cat? He says, have you ever seen a smart mouse eat a dumb cat? That's the key point he made. And later on it was just hilarious. But
now you were, I know at one point you told me you had pictures of when you were in a tank unit.
Yeah.
Now when was
yeah,
this?
that was in 1944 when, first of all, after the invasion, which took place on June 6th.
Now where were you in the invasion when that happened?
I was still
In Cologne?
in Cologne,
Okay.
yes. And I didn't move into the service until August of So the Americans then broke through at Avranches and circumnavigated the Germans and had a pocket at a place called Falaise, and a lot of Germans were lost in, and then they moved quickly back to what we call the West Wall, and the British referred to it as the Siegfried Line. And the Americans kind of came there and sort of stopped. I think basically they ran out of supply lines and things. It was just overextended too quick. There were a lot of fights around Aachen, which is in French, Aix-la-Chapelle. That's a famous town where German emperors were crowned, you know, like Charles the Great in 800, so a very historic cities. And then they had an area called the Hürtgenwald, which is a very foresty, hilly area where somebody had said you got to go through there, and it was easier to defend than to attack. So that was kind of a standstill. Then in
Is that when you were in the tank unit, when you went
no,
to service?
I later.
Okay.
When the units came ready and they wanted to go and start attacking the Americans in the Battle of Bulge, there was a big saying around that the Americans had all these spies in Germany, and they would listen to everything, primarily the British, and so everybody was looked at, you know, are you the spy? What they hadn't realized and hadn't even picked up the concept that the Americans were just reading our messages and had decoded them. And just as quickly as the message went out, they read it and they could counter it. And the Germans had such a secret code, which was controlled by a machine called Enigma, which had different wheels in, and the Americans had done this, and they could read it, and it would take them about 2-3 hours to figure out the code for the day. And one of the things that brought down the code was that many stations had to report in every day, give kind of a day report.
Yeah.
And in America we call it a morning report, and they would say, nothing new here, and repeat that every day. And so as you know that's what it's going to be, you can backtrack it, what the code is. And the Germans were just too damn cocky that they said, no, they're not going to break this, you know, no way.
Yeah.
And then when the Battle of the Bulge, which was, I don't know whether it was Hitler's idea, but anyway, it was an idea because the Russians had halted. And the Russians had halted in front of Warsaw. You heard of the Warsaw Uprising. And they rose up against the Germans, thinking that the Russians gonna cross the Vistula River and help them. The Russians had no such intention. If you Poles wanna kill each other, fine, we're not gonna come. And so the Germans then wanted to mount an attack in the Ardennes, which is very narrow, very hilly, has few small bridges, has some creeks there, and we had, you know, 65-ton tanks, and they had to kind of single moves there. I thought it was a poor way to do it. But they caught the Americans by complete surprise in that they no longer gave orders over the wires. All orders were hand-carried. So for the first time, Eisenhower said in Reims, most Americans were looking forward to Christmas. And so on December 16th, that's when we attacked, and I was in the second wave, and it fizzled out on Christmas Eve. That's when the sky became clear, and primarily the fighter bombers, and we call them Jagdbomber, you know, chase bomber, and short for Yabu. They were ruling the sky during the day. And I
So
remember,
you were in the Battle of the Bulge then, the
yes,
second wave of...
I wasn't in the first wave, you know, it was kind of support, and it was in the neighborhood of Bastogne. Got fired in there, then Patton came up down from Alsace-Lorraine and relieved them there. I think the 101st Division was there, the paratroopers. And after the first day, you know, which caught the Americans by complete surprise, we had about 20,000 prisoners. They didn't know what to do with them, just go that way. And after Christmas, it was a stalemate, and then we moved back to our original positions by this January 31st. So what we had taken in 8 days, we lost in 6 weeks again, and it was there where it was before.
Yeah.
Nothing achieved. And a lot of you know, people ran out of fuel.
Yeah.
And you didn't get the U.S. fuel dumps, and also the Germans had not recognized that the Americans had a pipeline with fuel, you know. We never heard, we ran around with jerry cans, and they're 20 liters, 5 gallons, you know.
What, in your opinion, what was the purpose of the Battle of the Bulge?
The purpose of the Battle of the Bulge was to go through and come up straight towards the North Sea and cut that in half, cut Belgium off, and take the key port of Antwerp. Antwerp was the main unloading station.
Yep.
And the Americans had gotten it rather late too, because there are some islands in front of the estuary that the Germans held, and so that became the main one, because Cherbourg and Le Havre, they were all destroyed, and there was not much. And the Americans do everything big style, you know. They're not like the Chinese, everybody picks up, or the Russians. Yeah. You pick up everything here and you bring it to the next village, and then you go home, and the next village you carry it on there. They did everything themselves. In fact, I brought some pictures for you here on the pipeline they made across the Rhine River. And I feel that their support, which was tremendous, we couldn't match by a long shot. They just had well organized, and they were managing their armed forces instead of controlling them. We were controlling them. And the Americans would accept a design that was substandard, but would stick to it, while the Germans would always renew, and then the parts wouldn't fit. So we were opposed to the Sherman tank, which was rated very high by the US people, and in looking at it, we found there were two distinct differences there. One of them were the items supplied by the military, you know, the armor, the design. The other one by the industry. Everything that the industry supplied was superb. Engine, the relief wheels, the springs, and that worked very well. Everything the military had designed was, pardon the expression, crap. So, but they would have the advantage over our tanks that they would have 10 and we had 1. And while our firepower could reach them at a further distance, they were very fast. The turning radius of the American tank was much faster than ours. Ours went slower, and they would come from here and from that side, and you couldn't swing it either way. And some of them, what I never found was that they would incapacitate a German tank by just shooting out the tracks. They were hitting to destroy the tank, and the tank had such armor, it would either bounce off or it would just give a 2-centimeter indent in it, which meant nothing. But in these areas of heavy woods, they're ineffective. You know, these German tanks were designed for the open space in Russia, where they come, 3 miles, you can see them coming down there, and you're in range a lot faster than they are, so this is no problem.
Okay, continue on from the Battle of the Bulge then, and you've backed up your original position.
Yes, and then it was sort of demoralizing, I would say. Most people were involved by saying, we need to get it over with. And so in March, on March 7th, the Americans captured the MAAG Bridge, and then on the east side of the river, with my unit, we surrendered, and I was taken prisoner until May 8th, when the war was over, because I lived within 100 miles and I was under 16, and they just let us kids go.
So you were not 16 years old yet when...
Right.
Okay.
And but the Americans would not let you across the Rhine River. And so I had to walk considerable north where the British were, and the British let you go over, and I came home. Our house had received 2 direct hits from what I believe were Sherman tanks, chimney taken out, and I believe that the Americans thought that these were observation posts for a mortar unit. And then they hit the next house too, but the observation were in the next house, which they didn't go to. And they ran cable down to the guns so that they couldn't listen. Not until the first observation plane came over and they could see that there was a valley did they knock them out. When I came home, there were GIs in the house, and of course we were gently thrown out.
Is this the house that you still is in your family? You showed
Yes.
me pictures of?
Yes.
With the castle up on the
Right.
hill? Okay.
And they were just in the garage, they had a 1/4-ton Jeep trailer, and they were putting on the flush doors and were painting them green, olive, and they were hauling more loot, the victors go the spoil. And there was a lieutenant there, and I reported in. I smartly saluted him, and he of course didn't salute back, and then called me a name, referring to the illegitimacy of my birth. And I was just about asking him if he knew where my parents were, when a GI in the rear waved me. So I walked around the Jeep, and he said, "Did you have anything to eat yet?" I said, "No, I haven't eaten in 2 days." He said, "Come on, I'll fix you a sandwich." And he fixed me the first Spam sandwich.
Oh, did he?
It was on this white bread. And in talking with him, remember we had English in school, so I was able to communicate, not perfect, but enough to get the idea across. He was a barber of Italian descent in Brooklyn. Now, I never got the address because at that time, are you ever going to go to America? It never came up. And I felt like I wish I had that, and I would have liked to buy him a dinner or what, since I
Better
went
than
to
Spam, hopefully.
No, well, this was silver. And the real point he made, and I want to emphasize that, is he brought home to me the American superiority. By the spam was in a can that tall, and it was square. I don't know if you ever seen one.
I have, yeah.
And it was half empty or half full. He said, "Why don't you take the can with you? I don't want to get my sleeves greasy."
Oh, jeez.
I was, I was impressed. I found my parents, and here is a point where my mother is smarter than my father. My mother's smartness actually started there when my father ended. Example, the Americans then turned the house over to the British turned it over to the Belgians because they got a division there. The southern part of the British zone where we were, this was under Belgian command. So my mother said, "It's always the same people get here, I had about enough." Puts a hat on, coat on, and takes the train to Düsseldorf and sees the commanding British officer, general of the Rhine Army. And my mother would not take, "No, you can't see him." My mother said, no, my mother said, if somebody says no to you, it always means not yet.
Yeah.
So there's no in your language. So she saw the general, and my mother said, if that is such an honor, to make your house available to the occupiers, why don't you rotate around? Why are always the same people gonna get this? And the general said, "Madam, you have a valid point. I see you get your house back." And we did.
That's great.
So then I went back to high school. I hadn't finished high school. And in 1948, I finished and learned photography because we had a photography store
Which you still do today very well.
On a souvenir basis. Cash up front was very good. And I wanted to be an engineer. And my father said, "You're going to be a photographer." "I don't want to be a photographer. I didn't ask you." And so I learned photography in University of Bonn and got my apprenticeship. And as soon as I was finished, which was in 1951, in 1949, they had taken the three occupation areas of the French, the British, and the US and made it in a tri-zone and established West Germany as a country again. Adenauer became the chief. And since he wanted the capital, Berlin was out of range anyway, and most of them wanted Frankfurt, but he won by one voice. So Bonn became the capital, and the Americans had already headquarters across from us. There was John McClure. He was the High Commissioner. And so they built an embassy there, and in 51, when I was ready, I took my portfolio and I said, "Gee, you gotta go someplace. You go to the Americans, you learn English at the same time to a far advanced level." And so the way I am, I go get an audience, I open my portfolio, here's what I do, you got a job for me. And I said, "No, but we have a PX, that sells to military and to embassy personnel, and they have a photo department, they may take you." So I go there, hired me on the spot, and there were two GIs there who ran the show, and I was the gopher, go for this, go for that. And they were really in charge, and I was a nothing, until some customers came and they found out I knew a hell of a lot more about German cameras and filming than they did. They directed them to me, and then the manager saw it and put me in charge over the two GIs. But I didn't retaliate. That's for the people. And then I became the floor walker, And within another 6 months, I was the assistant manager. And I was impressed by the Americans. You know, you got promoted on who you were and what you could do for the business, not whose son or son-in-law you were. They then transferred me to Koblenz, and I went to Bitburg. Bitburg, a famous one. And I had 42 girls working for me. Then came something, my brother, who had learned to be a mechanic, switched and went back to be a photographer. And since I'm the oldest one, I was supposed to get the whole business. I felt left out. So I went to my mother, said, you couldn't go to my father, come on.
Your mother's now smarter than your father, anyways.
Absolutely. This is where you go. If you want to survive the war, you go to my father. If you, for instance, he had all the windows removed from the house, all in the basement. He had nailed it shut with boards and, you know, wood. When the war was over, he took that out, he had the windows back in, and people came and said, Mr. Kern, where did you get the glass? And he said, mine never broke. So that was my father. But my mother, I said, what gives? The business is a nice business, but it cannot support two families. And my mother came back with a classic. She said, Walter, you can do anything in the world you want. Your brother cannot. So, as fate would have it, I was in Bitburg, and a cousin of mine from the United States came, and she says, why don't you come to America? And I said, yes. I said, she just talk. But she worked very hard on it, and in 1953, I went on a boat. You couldn't go on an American boat, you couldn't go on a British boat, that wouldn't take any German. I came on a Greek liner. Took 14 days, like a banana boat. Couldn't even land in Manhattan. No, you had to go across to go to Hoboken, New Jersey. And on the ship, I learned two important lessons, and that is the ship, as we were already docked in Hoboken. As I stand in line with all the immigrants, go to Ellis Island, you know, get checked out, here comes a custom official and looked at me and says, can I see your ticket? I said, what ticket? The ticket you came over on the ship. Where would I have it? You know, I'm already here, I paid for. I probably saved it for a souvenir someplace in my luggage because I took a boat to get more luggage with me. On a plane, you only get 40 pounds. So I found it, and he said, I knew I was right. You don't have to go to Ellis Island. You can go right off the boat. Why is that, sir? He says, first class and second class passengers never become a burden of the state. All men are created equal, I learned right there. Then I said, how come you picked me out? You were well dressed. So I went. And I got in a photo store here and never went on a date. My God, you couldn't afford that. No, I made $50 a week. I got a little extra, and I got $62 across. I had rented a room for $5 a week, ate for $1 a day, and I saved $50 a week.
Amazing.
And if you go on a trip, you know, with a girl, you invite a girl, you have to go pick her up, bring her some flowers. In Germany, you would bring some flowers to the mother too. Then take a cab, go downtown, eat a little, go to a show, Radio City Music Hall, bring her back on a cab, go home on the subway, and you're rid of $25. And the possible reward could be a 3-second kiss. That'd be the poorest investment I ever made.
Maybe we ought to get from here to Korea somehow, okay?
Yeah.
So,
And
yeah, get us to,
anyway, now first, then I got asked by the draft board to join. And I said, I'm a German, Ken. They said, well, we know that, but we need you. What do you need me for? I'm a little nothing. Well, you speak perfect German. And wise guy me, I said, go to Germany, there are 85 million people who speak perfect German. And then he said, you better talk to the major here. And the major came and he says, we looked at your military record, you're clean, you speak very good German, and we are going to rearm the German army.
now this is in 53,
54,
54, okay.
at the beginning, January, February. I joined in March 24th. So he said, we need to retrain the German army, and the first thing is I said, you can't do that, isn't even 10 years gone by. I had to swear on 10 stacks of Bible up and down the road, never to pick up a weapon again. They said, well, we have problems with the Russians, so we need to set up the defense, and we will transfer the eastern air bases all to the jurisdiction of the new German Air Force. And so I was confronted, and I said, remembering my grandfather who said, wessen Brot ich esse, dessen Lied ich singe. Whose bread I eat, whose song I sing. So I said, if the country is good enough to take me in and become a new home, I am going to be good enough to give 4 years of my life and do my duty. And I did, and they sent me promptly to Germany, where I was training. I never was in Korea. I was in Germany setting up the defenses against the possible attack from the Soviets or their satellites, like East Germany was well armed. And we transferred all the bases, I did all the translations, I made all the documents, I introduced all the Germans to the new training, and I worked very hard to get it integrated. I was a personal interpreter for General Everest, the Commander-in-Chief of the European Air Forces. I was the translator for Strauss, Franz Josef Strauss, the German defense minister, and for David K. Bruce, who was the ambassador to the United States in Germany. So I had to speak off like the ambassador never would give you a script, and I would have to memorize what he just said and then speak on occasions and set it all up. And in December of 1956, we transferred successful all the bases, and we were then transferred to what is called MAAG, Military Assistance Advisory Group, and I stayed there, extended even my tour to the end of 1958, when I was discharged.
Now, so you rearmed the German
Yes,
army.
yes.
Now, how many men or people did this involve? Major?
Well, on the Air Force, 4,000. There were training on the T-33s, on the F-86s, and they also had the F-80, but primarily the F-86. And what was very interesting and challenging was to marry the American pilots with the Germans, and the Germans were all World War II experts. And it was very hard for the Americans, who had shot down maybe 5 or 10 German airplanes, to meet a German there. And I remember there was Booby Hartmann, he the highest scorer from the Germans on the Russian front. And so this I was translating, you know, I was standing between the men, said, I shot 10 German planes down, and he says, what did you do? And he said, well, I shot a lot down. And then the other American came by there and they said, you know who you just talked to? And the man that was a captain said, no, I don't know. He says, this is Booby Hartmann, the highest scorer. He shot down 352 Russian planes. 352. But Booby was smart enough, you know, not to push that. So for instance, the difficulties you have, they're at times minute. We had a parade, and you make left turn and right turn. Now, if you make a turn left, you know, you make it on the left heel, and turn right, you make it on the right heel. That's what the Americans do. The Germans do everything on the left heel. So if you make a couple of commands go back and you don't have the units far enough apart, they're going to run into each other. I found this out, and it took me a little while to figure out what caused it. Okay. So this was, and when I was discharged, I remember they wanted me to stay, the general too, and I said, General, I'm only a staff sergeant. I do all the work, the major and the colonel get all the money. You make me an officer, and I'll stay with you. And I was already over 26. Remember when I joined, I was 24 years old. So by the time I got out, I was 28 years old. And they were trying to get me to re-enlist, and they said, you're going to get $1,000. I said, well, I'm going to get more than $1,000 as it is. How come? Well, I say I get the last month's pay, $250. I get 60 days accrued leaves, that's $500, and I get $300 mustering out pay, that's $1,050. And so I went then to college and finished in 2.5 years, mechanical engineering.
Where'd you go to
BS,
college?
in Tri-State University, that is 10 miles south of Michigan and 10 miles west of Ohio.
Okay.
And the next day I was on the payroll with P&G and worked for them for 30 years. Mm-hmm. And retired and did very well, I would say. I have one son who's 46 and no grandchildren.
Mm-hmm. One thing I think is interesting you told me at one time was going back to your house in Germany and the castle on the hill. We have a little bit of time here. Tell us the story of how your family acquired more property and eventually have a restaurant and so forth.
Yes, that is a small winery. It's still sitting there, and it's called the New House, and it looks like it's almost collapsing, tipping over. And it was built in 1691 because the French burned it down in 1689. And once I quipped with my grandmother, if that's the new house, you know what happened to the old one? And she set me down and showed me the charred timber that was still there. And they started to sharecrop there for the night. And
so, I mean, you have a night living in the castle at that
point.
point.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so they wanted to buy it, and he wanted to sell it. And so they took him 200 years to save enough money to buy it.
That's amazing.
And it still stands there. A distant cousin of mine runs it, still in the family. And my mother remembers her grandmother there. And her grandmother had 18 children. And she became a widow at age 46. She would, during the grape harvest time, which is maybe 14 days in Germany at the max, and she would take a whole back load and walk to Cologne, walk 20 miles, and get for the whole load the equal of $1 and would buy candy for 5 cents to bring to a cousin, stay overnight there, and the next day walk back. And at that time, there were no bridges across the Rhine. The first bridge was built in 1896. There was a bridge there that Caesar built when he came. He came to Germany and he built a bridge there near Remagen too, where the famous bridge there collapsed.
Yeah.
And she was from the other side and she hollered until somebody found out and gave greetings to the family.
It's hard for me to believe that, I mean, I believe you, but that your family would save 200 years.
Well,
What do they do with the money that one generation saved? Do they pass it on to the next generation?
yes.
But it's amazing that somewhere along the line, someone didn't break down and go spend it on something.
Well, that chance is always there, but then you're drilled your responsibility. You know, you family, like the Italians say, familia, familia. Or I remember when General MacArthur gave his last speech at West Point, his was the Corps, the Corps, the Corps.
Yeah.
And once you're in that, you say, gee, in 50 years we're gonna have it. You know, you had these coins, people would try them, you know, bite on them to see whether it was gold, because gold you could put your teeth mark in it. And it's just done.
Was it hid on the mattress or down in the
I have
basement?
no idea. Well, I'm sure it was, and what we had good, they owned it already during the 30-Year War, which was a religious war between Austria and Sweden, 1618 to 1648. And the Swedes came all through Germany and made it the battlefield, and they would give you a Swedish drink, which was a special concoction of what they picked out of the toilet and ran it down, and usually people would tell them. But that didn't come in the Rhineland. During Louis XIV's reign, who reigned from 1643 till 1715, and he was 5 years when he was made the king. Before him was this Cardinal Richelieu, you've heard of him. He had established the best thing for France would be to have the Rhine be the eastern border of France. So Louis XIV kept after that too, even against the advice of his cabinet. And the famous thing he said was there, and they said, but sir, you cannot do this. This is, you know, not in the interest of the state. And his answer was in French, L'État, c'est moi. I'm the state. And they said, well, but after you're dead, what's going to happen? He said, après moi, le déluge. After me, the flood. I don't give a whoop.
Oh,
So,
that's great.
but now I'm very much contributing to the wounded soldiers and to the handicaps, and I try to be, and I am also a member of the Kassel mission of the 445th Bomber Group. This was a bomber group who flew on September 27, 1944 against Germany, got separated from the Polk, and got waylaid by some German fighters, and within 4 minutes, out of 36 planes, lost 33. And they have an association, and about 10 years ago, they asked the German pilots who fought them to come over here, and I said, I'll volunteer, bring them up there and translate everything, and so I became
Good
a
for
member
you.
of that organization. I proudly have a cap, that's 445th.
Great. Well, Walter,
So-
has been very interesting. You've had a very interesting life. and we appreciate you telling your story.
Well,
I know it could go on for hours.
I'm delighted to be here. And of course, you know, you have to learn and become a good American and try to set the example as a citizen what the next generation needs. And in my opinion, they need a lot of help and a lot of example setting by us older folks. And
Not the
so it is
athletes.
not only a pleasure, but also an honor to be an American citizen.
Well, thank you very much. That's for your time. Very interesting.